The fluorescent lights of Boston Mercy Hospital hummed their sterile song at 8:47 a.m., casting everything in that particular shade of institutional white that made even the living look half dead. Evangeline Thornwood stood motionless in the corner of Trauma Bay 3, her powder blue scrubs blending into the equipment carts and supply cabinets like she'd learned to blend into everything else over the past 6 months. Invisible.
Starting compressions, VFib, charging.
Safe.
Ready.
Her
Clear.
hospital badge
Pulse is
still
weak.
had
Continue
that factory
CPR,
fresh
epinephrine
shine,
now.
the lamination barely touched by the wear of time. E. Thornwood are in 6 months. It declared in bold letters, a proclamation of newness that might as well have been a warning label. The other nurses had stopped trying to include her in their break room gossip weeks ago. The doctors barely remembered her name. To everyone at Mercy, she was exactly what her badge claimed, a rookie. Still learning, still struggling, still finding her footing in a profession she'd supposedly just entered. The lie sat on her chest like a stone. On the gurney in front of her, a man was dying, 43 years old according to the chart. Insurance adjuster, father of 2, came in complaining of chest pain 90 minutes ago. Now his heart had stopped, and the code blue team swarmed around him like wasps around a disturbed nest, all panic and inefficient motion. Dr. Preston Whitmore, 45 and eternally convinced of his own brilliance, barked orders that came 3 seconds too late to matter. His hands shook as he tried to intubate, missing the vocal cords twice before a resident had to take over. The compressions were wrong, any combat medic could see that. Too shallow, wrong rhythm, bouncing the patient instead of actually circulating blood. Eva's hands clenched at her sides, fingernails digging crescents into her palms. She knew exactly what needed to happen, could see the sequence in her mind with the kind of crystal clarity that came from doing this exact thing under mortar fire in places where the nearest real hospital was 3 helicopter flights away. The man needed a central line, needed it 5 minutes ago. His airway was compromised. The intubation attempt had caused swelling. They were losing him not because he couldn't be saved, but because no one in this room remembered how to think clearly when everything went to hell. Her feet wanted to move. Her training screamed at her to act. But Evelyn Cross was dead, had been dead for 3 years, and Evangeline Thornwood was just a rookie nurse who knew her place. The monitor's steady alarm became a flatline scream. Someone said something about calling it, checking the time, another preventable death in a system that valued procedure over results. Eva closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the man was gone, and Dr. Whitmore was pulling off his gloves with the kind of practiced resignation that suggested he'd stopped seeing these failures as personal a long time ago. At time of death, 9:23 p.m. He announced to no one in particular. The room began to empty, nurses stripping the gurney, residents updating charts. Everyone moving on to the next crisis, the next patient, the next shift. Life in the emergency room was a conveyor belt. You didn't stop for the ones who fell off. Eva stayed in her corner, staring at the space where the man had been. Thornwood, she turned. Linda Reeves, a nurse in her 50s with kind eyes and 20 years of ER experience, stood in the doorway. Unlike the younger staff, Linda had never dismissed Eva, had actually seemed to see something in her that made the older woman thoughtful. "You all right, honey?" Eva's voice came out flat, professional, empty. "Yes, ma'am, just cleaning up." Linda studied her for a long moment. "You have the eyes," she said quietly. "Ma'am, the eyes, like you've seen things, more than what happens in a place like this." Linda stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I was an Army nurse. Long time ago. Desert Storm. I know that look. The one that says you're watching someone die, and you know exactly how to stop it, but something's keeping you frozen." Eva's jaw tightened. "I'm just a rookie. Not my place to step in when doctors are running the code." "Mm-hmm." Linda didn't sound convinced. "Well, just so you know, the offer stands. You ever want to talk about whatever it is you're running, from my doors open." She left before Eva could formulate a response that wasn't a lie. Alone in the trauma bay, Eva finally let her hands unclench. They were steady. They were always steady when it mattered. That was the problem. She'd been trained too well to forget and not well enough to forgive. The break room was empty when she retreated there an hour later, her shift technically over, but her feet not quite ready to carry her to the parking lot and the anonymous apartment that waited beyond. She made coffee she didn't want staring at the ancient TV mounted in the corner. Local news. Another story about budget cuts. Another panel of suited bureaucrats explaining why veterans didn't need the services they'd been promised. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. Still hiding Cross. Her blood went cold. She deleted it without responding, blocked the number. It was the 3rd time this month. Someone out there knew who she really was. Someone was watching. And sooner or later, Evangeline Thornwood's carefully constructed walls were going to come down. She just hadn't expected it to happen tonight. The automatic doors of the ER entrance hissed open at 8:43 p.m., admitting a gust of October cold and the rattle of worn wheelchair wheels on linoleum. Ava heard it from the supply closet where she was restocking gauze, that particular sound that spoke of age and hard use and refusal to quit. She stepped into the hallway and saw him. The man in the wheelchair was old 70 at least, with the kind of thinness that suggested a body that had burned through its reserves long ago and was now running on pure, stubborn will. His hair was military short and winter white, his jaw carved from granite. He wore a faded Marine Corps jacket despite the hospital's heating, and his hands, gnarled and scarred, gripped the wheelchair rims with the kind of strength that came from decades of refusing help. But it was his eyes that stopped Eva cold. She knew those eyes, had seen them in mirrors and in the faces of men twice her age. Eyes that had watched friends die. Eyes that had made impossible choices. Eyes that carried the weight of every decision that came after. Beside the wheelchair, limping on three legs, a German shepherd moved with the liquid awareness of a working dog that had never quite figured out how to turn off. His right hind leg barely touched the ground, the subtle hitch in his gait speaking of recent injury. But his head was up, ears forward, scanning the busy ER with the kind of tactical assessment that had nothing to do with being someone's pet. Military working dog, active duty unless Eva missed her guess, which meant the old man wasn't just a veteran, he was still connected. The receptionist's voice carried down the hallway, professionally pleasant but with an edge. "Sir, I understand your concern, but we're not equipped to treat animals. You'll need to take him to a veterinary." "He's not an animal." The old man's voice was quiet, but it cut through the ambient noise like a blade. "He's a Marine, and he's earned treatment." Eva's feet moved before her brain caught up, carrying her closer, drawn by something she couldn't name and didn't want to examine. "Doctor." Whitmore appeared from one of the exam rooms, his face already setting into lines of bureaucratic disapproval. "Sir, this is a civilian hospital. We have protocols, liability issues. I'm sorry, but you need to leave." The German shepherd's lip curled, a low growl rumbling from deep in his chest. Not aggressive, Eva's trained eye noted. Defensive, protecting his handler. The dog shifted weight off his injured leg, and the pain that flashed across his intelligent face made something in Eva's chest constrict. "Please." The old man's voice cracked slightly, and Eva saw his hands tighten on the wheelchair arms. "His name is Ranger. He's served 3 combat deployments. He's not just some... I don't care if he's served 30 deployments." Director Helena Marsh materialized from her office, a woman in her early 50s who'd perfected the art of corporate compassion that never quite reached her eyes. "We have regulations. This animal could be carrying diseases, could attack staff, could trigger lawsuits we cannot afford. Security." 2 guards in ill-fitting uniforms started forward, their movements uncertain. They were hospital security, not law enforcement. Probably minimum wage workers who'd taken the job because it seemed easy. Now they were being asked to forcibly remove a decorated veteran and his service dog. Ranger's growl deepened, his body coiling despite the injury. The old man reached down, placed one scarred hand on the dog's head. "Easy, Marine, easy." The command was soft, but Ranger responded instantly, the growl cutting off. He stayed tense, though, ready, watching every person in the vicinity like threats on a battlefield perimeter. Eva stood frozen 20 feet away, her back pressed against the nurse's station. Every instinct she'd spent 3 years suppressing suddenly screaming at her to act. She could see what the others couldn't or chose not to see. The dog wasn't aggressive. He was scared, in pain, protecting the only pack member he had left, because that's what you did. You protected your own. Even when you were hurt, even when you were alone, even when no one else seemed to give a damn. The security guards reached for the wheelchair. Ranger lunged, teeth bared, and one guard jerked back with a yelp. The dog hadn't actually bitten him, had stopped inches short, but the reaction was enough. "That animal just attacked my employee." Director Marsh's voice went ice cold. "Call animal control. I want it removed and quarantined. And I want you," she pointed at the old man, "out of this hospital immediately, or I'll have you arrested for trespassing." Something inside Eva broke. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a quiet internal collapse, like a dam that had been eroding grain by grain, finally giving way. She'd spent 3 years running from who she'd been. 3 years trying to convince herself that keeping her head down and following the rules would somehow make the guilt less sharp. 3 years pretending that Evelyn Cross had died in that Damascus compound, along with Corporal Ryan Shepard, and 3 other Marines whose names she whispered every night before sleep refused to come. But standing in this sterile hallway, watching a scared dog and a proud old man being treated like garbage, Eva realized something. She was already dead, had been for 3 years, and dead people had nothing left to lose. Her feet carried her forward, smooth, calm. The muscle memory of 1,000 crisis situations taking over, shutting down the parts of her brain that wanted to overthink and analyze and justify. She stepped between the security guards and the wheelchair, dropped to one knee on the cold linoleum, and looked the German shepherd directly in the eyes. "Hey!" Her voice came out different than it had been all night, steadier, lower. The voice she'd used when talking down injured Marines who were confused and combative from blood loss and adrenaline. "Easy now, Marine, I'm not going to hurt you." Ranger's lips pulled back further, showing teeth. "A warning, a promise. Touch my handler and I'll end you regardless of this leg." "Nurse Thornwood," Dr. Whitmore's voice carried warning. "Step away from that animal immediately." Eva didn't move, didn't break eye contact with the dog. She'd learned in Afghanistan that working dogs could read human intent better than most people could. They knew when you were scared, knew when you were lying, knew when you were a threat. So she let Ranger see the truth. She wasn't a threat, she was a medic. And medics helped. Slowly giving the dog time to track her movement, Eva raised her right hand, not reaching for him, just showing it. Palm open, steady, 3 fingers together, thumb and pinky slightly curled. A specific hand position that wasn't taught in civilian nursing schools or veterinary programs. It was taught in Joint Special Operations medical training, to corpsmen who worked with MARSOC raiders, who learned how to handle military working dogs in combat environments, who needed to treat K9S in the field when the nearest veterinary support was a radio call and a helicopter that might not come. Eva placed her hand on Ranger's neck, just behind his jaw. 3 fingers on the pressure point. Thumb stroking behind his ear in small, precise circles. The growling stopped, just like that, like someone had flipped a switch. Ranger's tense muscles softened under her touch, his head tilting slightly into her hand. His dark eyes, which had been hard and defensive, shifted to something else. Something Eva recognized because she'd seen it in mirrors for 3 years. Recognition. This human knows. This human understands. This human is safe. The ER had gone silent. 20 people watching a rookie nurse do something that shouldn't have been possible. Eva's other hand moved to Ranger's injured leg, her touch feather light but confident. She palpated the joint, tested the range of motion, checked for heat and swelling. The dog stood perfectly still, trusting her completely, and that trust felt like both a gift and an indictment. Partial ACL tear. Eva announced, her voice carrying that crisp authority that came from giving medical assessments in situations where being wrong meant someone died. Grade 2. No fracture, mild inflammation, treatable with rest ice anti-inflammatory medication and restricted activity for 4 to 6 weeks. No surgery required unless conservative management fails. She looked up at Dr. Whitmore for the first time. He's stable. The injury is painful but not life-threatening. He's not a danger to anyone. He's scared and hurting and trying to protect his handler. That's not aggression, that's loyalty. Dr. Whitmore's face had gone an interesting shade of red. You don't have the authority to make that assessment. You're not a veterinarian. You're barely qualified to. I'm qualified to recognize a soft tissue injury. Eva stood, keeping one hand on Ranger's head. The dog leaned into her touch, some of the tension bleeding out of his frame. And I'm qualified to know the difference between an animal that needs to be removed and a Marine who needs help. Marine Director Marsh's voice could have cut glass. It's a dog. He's a United States military working dog. The old man in the wheelchair spoke for the first time since Eva had intervened, his voice thick with emotion. He's saved more lives than most people in this building ever will. And this young woman just showed him more respect in 2 minutes than your entire staff has in 20. Director Marsh's expression shifted from angry to calculating, and Eva saw the moment the woman realized this situation could become a public relations nightmare. Decorated veteran refused treatment. Service dog threatened with removal. All it would take was one person with a cell phone camera and the wrong 30 seconds of footage going viral. But Eva had made the calculation too, and she'd chosen which side of the line she was standing on. Nurse Thornwood, Director Marsh's voice was carefully controlled now. You violated established protocol. You placed yourself and this facility at risk. You acted without authorization from a supervising physician. Do you understand the severity of what you've just done? Eva met the woman's eyes steadily. Yes, ma'am, I do. Then you understand that I have no choice but to terminate your employment, effective immediately. Something that might have been relief washed through Eva's chest. She'd been waiting for this, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for the moment when being Evangeline Thornwood became impossible, and Evelyn Cross came clawing back out of her shallow grave. I understand, ma'am. She stripped off her hospital badge, set it on the nurse's station counter with a small click that sounded unnaturally loud in the silent hallway. Around her, staff members looked away, uncomfortable, embarrassed, relieved it wasn't them. Linda Reeves stood in the doorway of the break room, arms crossed, expression unreadable. But she gave Eva the smallest nod, approval, or maybe just recognition. Either way, it was more than Eva expected. I'll escort them out, Eva said, moving to the back of the wheelchair without waiting for permission. Her hands found the grips, and she began pushing. The old man didn't protest, just reached down to rest one hand on Ranger's head as the dog fell into step beside them. The crowd parted, and Eva guided them through the automatic doors into the October night. The cold air hit like a slap after the stifling warmth of the hospital. Eva's thin scrubs provided basically no protection, but she didn't slow down. She pushed the wheelchair down the sidewalk away from the bright lights and the watching eyes until they reached a quiet section of the parking lot near a rusted pickup truck that had probably been old when the man in the wheelchair was young. Only then did she stop. Only then did she release the handles and step back, putting professional distance between herself and the situation she'd just imploded her life for. Thank you. The old man's voice was rough. You didn't have to do that. Didn't have to lose your job for us. Eva looked down at Ranger, who was sitting now, his weight carefully shifted off his injured leg. The dog gazed up at her with those dark, intelligent eyes, and for a moment, Eva saw another dog. Another time, another handler who trusted her completely. She'd failed that handler, failed him, and 3 others who died while she was trying to save the ones who had better odds. But tonight, she'd done something right. Yes, Eva said quietly. I did. The old man studied her face, and Eva saw his expression shift. Saw the exact moment he recognized something in her that matched something in himself. You've served. It wasn't a question. Eva didn't answer it anyway. I'm Colonel Duncan Blackwell, he continued. Retired, Marine Force Recon, call sign Reaper. He paused, then added with quiet pride. Ranger here has 3 combat deployments. Afghanistan twice, then Iraq. Best explosive detection dog in his class. Better than most humans I've worked with. Eva knelt again, let Ranger sniff her hand properly now that the crisis had passed. His tail gave a small wag, and she felt something tight in her chest loosen fractionally. He's a good Marine, she said. The best. Duncan's voice cracked. My legs gave out 5 years ago. Shrapnel from Fallujah finally caught up with me. Can't walk more than a few feet. When I got Ranger after I retired, thought he'd just be company. Turns out he needed me as much as I needed him. We take care of each other. He looked back at the hospital, jaw tight. Legs started bothering him 2 days ago. Figured it was just a strain. But tonight he couldn't put weight on it at all. Closest of a hospital is 40 miles. They're closed till morning. Thought maybe, just maybe, a civilian ER might help. The way he said it, Eva could hear all the times he'd been disappointed. All the times the system that was supposed to support him had let him down. All the times he'd been made to feel like his service and Ranger service didn't matter once you weren't convenient anymore. I'm sorry, Eva said and meant it. Duncan shook his head. Don't apologize. You're the first person in that building who treated him like he matters. Treated me like I matter. He hesitated. What's your name, your real name, not just Nurse Thornwood? Eva opened her mouth to give him the lie, the safe answer, the name on the badge she'd just surrendered. But looking at this old Marine, this survivor, this man who'd given everything and asked for so little in return, she found she couldn't do it. Eva, she said, it wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't completely a lie either. My name is Eva. Well, Eva, Duncan extended one scarred hand. Thank you for seeing us. Really seeing this. Don't get that much anymore. She took his hand. His grip was still strong despite everything. Still solid. Behind them, the hospital doors hissed open. Eva turned, expecting security. Expecting to be told to leave hospital property. Expecting the final punctuation mark on this disaster of an evening. Instead, she saw headlights. 4 sets of them, powerful and bright, sweeping across the parking lot. Black SUVs, the kind that screamed federal government or military brass. They moved in formation, precise and coordinated, and Eva's training kicked in before her conscious mind could catch up. She stepped slightly in front of Duncan's wheelchair. Protective instinct. Old habits. The vehicle stopped in a semicircle, engines idling. Too many for a random visit, too organized for anything good. The door of the lead SUV opened, and a man stepped out. Late 50s gray hair cut military short shoulders that carried authority like a second skin. He wore civilian clothes, but everything about his bearing said active duty, high rank, used to being obeyed. Eva's pulse kicked up. Her hands, which had been steady all night, suddenly wanted to shake, because she knew this man. Rear Admiral Garrett Sullivan, her former commanding officer. The man who'd signed off on her resignation 3 years ago with the kind of disappointment that still made her stomach hurt to remember. The man who'd told her she was making a mistake, that running from trauma didn't heal it, that the Corps needed her, the man she'd promised to never see again. Sullivan's eyes found hers across the parking lot, and Eva watched his expression shift. Surprise, recognition, something that might have been relief or might have been resignation. Behind him, 7 more men emerged from the SUVs, not quite the same military bearing, but close. Special operations close. The kind of men who could wear civilian clothes and still look like they were carrying weapons and waiting for orders. Navy SEALs, Eva's brain supplied. Or maybe Marine Raiders. Either way, this wasn't a social call. Sullivan walked forward, his pace measured, his attention divided between Eva and the wheelchair she was partially shielding. "We're looking for the nurse who treated a military working dog," he said, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "We were told she'd been fired." Director Marsh appeared in the hospital doorway, flanked by Dr. Whitmore. Both of them had gone pale. "Admiral," Marsh said, the title coming out strangled. "I wasn't aware, we didn't realize." Sullivan didn't look at her. His eyes stayed locked on Eva's face. "The nurse," he repeated. "Where is she?" Eva stepped forward, away from Duncan, into the light, into the moment she'd been dreading and expecting for 3 years. "I'm here, sir." The silence that followed felt like the inhale before an explosion. Sullivan's jaw tightened, and Eva saw the exact moment he made the connection. Saw him recognize not just her face, but everything it represented, everything she'd run from. "Corpsman Cross." His voice was careful, neutral, but Eva heard the weight underneath. Or should I say Nurse Thornwood? Behind her, Duncan made a small sound, understanding, surprise. Eva stood perfectly still, shoulders back, chin up. The posture she'd learned in basic training, the one that said you were ready to face whatever came next, even if it destroyed you. "Either works, sir." Sullivan's mouth tightened. "We need to talk, all of us, inside." Director Marsh recovered her voice. "Admiral, I'm not sure that's appropriate. Miss Thornwood is no longer employed here, and I'm afraid we can't." Sullivan finally looked at her, and whatever Marsh saw in his expression made her take an involuntary step back. "Ma'am, with respect, I'm not asking your permission." He turned back to Eva. "Colonel Blackwell, K9 Ranger Corpsman Cross, inside. Now, the rest of you secure the perimeter." The SEALs moved instantly, spreading out, and Eva realized with a sinking sensation that this wasn't just about her getting fired for helping a dog. This was about something bigger. Something that required 7 special operators and a rear admiral to show up at a civilian hospital after hours. Something that had found Evelyn Cross despite 3 years of running and hiding and pretending to be someone else. Duncan was looking at her differently now. Calculating, reassessing. "Corpsman," he said quietly. "That means Navy medical." Eva confirmed, her voice flat. "Combat medic, attached to Marine Raider units. 7 years, 2 deployments." She paused, then added, "Retired." "Retired." Sullivan's tone suggested he had opinions about that particular word choice. "We'll see. Wheels up, people. Conference room. Now." He turned and walked back toward the hospital entrance, clearly expecting to be followed. The kind of man who'd spent decades giving orders and never doubting they'd be obeyed. Eva looked down at Ranger, who gazed up at her with complete trust. Then at Duncan, who watched her with new understanding and old respect. "Whatever this is," Duncan said quietly, "you don't have to face it alone, not anymore." Eva wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she'd learned the hard way that facing things alone was safer, that the less people knew about Evelyn Cross, the fewer could be hurt when her past came calling. But looking at this old Marine, this survivor, this man who'd sacrificed everything and still had the courage to ask for help when his partner needed it, Eva found she couldn't quite make the words come out. Instead, she just nodded, took hold of the wheelchair grips, and pushed Duncan Blackwell toward whatever waited inside, with Ranger limping faithfully beside them, and 7 SEALs falling into formation around them like an honor guard. Or maybe Eva thought with dark humor, like an execution detail. Either way, Evangeline Thornwood's carefully constructed new life was over. And Evelyn Cross, whether she wanted to be or not, was back. The conference room smelled like stale coffee and institutional disinfectant, with fluorescent lights that buzzed like dying wasps overhead. Eva stood with her back to the door, arms crossed, watching Rear Admiral Sullivan claim the head of the table like it was the bridge of a warship. Director Marsh and Dr. Whitmore hovered near the opposite end, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Duncan sat in his wheelchair, Ranger lying alert at his side, the dog's ears swiveling to track every person in the room. Sullivan set a tablet on the table but didn't activate it yet. His eyes found Eva's, and she saw 3 years of questions there. 3 years of wondering where she'd gone. 3 years of what might have been disappointment or might have been something harder to name. Miss Thornwood. Director Marsh's voice had taken on a quality Eva recognized from officers trying to reassert authority after losing it. I'm still not clear on why the United States Navy has taken such an interest in a terminated employee who violated multiple hospital protocols. Sullivan didn't look away from Eva, because she's not just a terminated employee. She's former Navy Hospital Corpsman Second Class Evelyn Cross, 7 years active duty, 2 combat deployments. Attached to Marine Special Operations Command. He paused, let that sink in. And 3 years ago, she was recommended for the Silver Star. The room went very quiet. Dr. Whitmore found his voice first. She told us she was a new graduate, 6 months experience. Her credentials showed. Her credentials are legitimate, Sullivan interrupted. Evangeline Thornwood graduated from an accelerated nursing program 18 months ago. Top of her class, passed her board's first try. Everything about her is real. He finally looked at Marsh. She just didn't mention what came before. Duncan's wheelchair creaked as he shifted positions, studying Eva with new intensity. Silver Star, that's not something they give out for showing up. No, Sullivan agreed. It's not. Eva's jaw tightened, but she kept her mouth shut. Let Sullivan tell it. Let him explain to these people why Evelyn Cross had died and Evangeline Thornwood had taken her place. Let him justify whatever he'd come here to do, because she already knew how this story ended. It always ended the same way. With 4 names she couldn't save, and 23 she could, and the weight of that math crushing her chest every single night. Sullivan activated the tablet, and a photograph appeared on the screen mounted on the wall. Eva's breath caught despite herself. She'd been 25 in that photo. Hair pulled back in a tight bun, desert camouflage streaked with dust and blood. That wasn't hers. Her face was harder than it was now, leaner, with the kind of exhaustion that went bone deep. She stood between 2 Marines, both grinning, despite the Syrian dust storm visible in the background. One of them had his arm around her shoulders. Corporal Ryan Shepard, her brains supplied before she could stop it. 23 years old, Kansas farm boy, wanted to be a veterinarian when he got out. He never got out. Damascus 2020, Sullivan said, his voice taking on the cadence of a mission briefing. Joint operation. Marine raiders conducting a hostage rescue. Hospital Corpsman Cross was the only medical support for a 27-man unit when they hit an IED ambush 3 clicks from the extraction point. He swiped to the next image, a tactical map marked with red and blue symbols that Eva recognized immediately. Enemy positions, friendly forces. The choke point where everything had gone to hell. 4 Marines were critically wounded. 23 had injuries ranging from moderate to severe. Senior Corpsman was KYA in the initial blast. That left Corpsman Cross, age 25, as the sole medical provider in an active combat zone with limited supplies and no backup. Another swipe. A commendation form, most of it redacted, but Eva could see her name. Could see the words exceptional valor and tactical medical decision-making under extreme duress. For the next 7 hours, Sullivan continued, his voice harder now. Corpsman Cross triage treated and stabilized 27 casualties while under intermittent fire. She made the tactical decision to prioritize patients with the highest probability of survival, which meant 4 men died. Eva's voice cut through the room like a blade. 4 Marines, because I chose wrong. Because I wasn't fast enough. Because I froze when it mattered. Sullivan's expression didn't change. 4 Marines died because their injuries were incompatible with survival in a combat environment with limited resources. 23 lived because you made the right call, even though it was the hardest call any medic should have to make. You weren't there. Eva's hands had balled into fists. You didn't see their faces, didn't hear what they said, didn't watch them. No. Sullivan's voice went quieter, which somehow made it worse. I wasn't there, but I've read every after-action report, talked to every survivor, and I've spent 3 years wondering why one of the best combat medics I've ever seen decided to throw away her career and hide in a civilian ER under a fake name. Director Marsh made a strangled sound. She lied on her application. That's grounds for, she didn't lie about anything that matters. Duncan said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made both Marsh and Whitmore shut up. She's qualified, overqualified. What she did before is her business. Sullivan's gaze shifted to Duncan for the first time, and Eva saw recognition there. Respect, one old warrior to another. Colonel Blackwell, it's an honor, sir. Sullivan straightened slightly. I've read about Fallujah, what you did for your men. Duncan's jaw tightened. What I did was my job. Same as Corman Cross here. Same as anyone who's ever worn the uniform and meant it. He looked at Eva. The real question is why you're dragging up her past when she's clearly moved on. Because, Sullivan said heavily, her past just came back. He swiped to a new image, and Eva's blood went cold. It was Ranger, but not the injured dog currently lying beside Duncan's wheelchair. This was Ranger 2 years ago, standing alert in full tactical gear handler beside him. A Marine in desert camouflage, young face split in a confident grin. Ranger was deployed to Afghanistan 2022 through 2024, Sullivan said. His handler during that deployment was Sergeant Marcus Webb. Explosive detection. Ranger has 17 confirmed finds, including one that saved an entire convoy from an ambush. Eva's heart was pounding now, but she kept her face neutral, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Last month, Ranger and Sergeant Webb were conducting a routine patrol outside Kandahar when they identified an IED. Standard procedure. Ranger alerted Webb, called it in. EOD was en route. Sullivan's voice went flat. The device detonated 30 seconds early. Sergeant Webb was killed instantly. Ranger sustained shrapnel wounds to his hind leg and was medevaced stateside. Duncan's hand dropped to Ranger's head, fingers gentle in the dog's fur. I fostered him, he said quietly, through a veteran K-9 program. They said he'd earned retirement, said he needed a quiet home with someone who understood. You did understand, Sullivan said, but someone else understood something different. 3 days after Ranger arrived at your home, your house was broken into, nothing stolen. But someone had been through your files, your computer, looking for something. Eva's mouth had gone dry. What kind of something? Sullivan swiped again. This time the image showed a small metal cylinder, maybe 3 inches long, attached to what looked like a tactical collar. Ranger's collar has a hidden compartment, standard issue for high-value K-9s deployed in sensitive areas. Usually contains the dog's medical records, deployment history, things like that. He paused. In Ranger's case, it contains encrypted intelligence, video footage from his final patrol, footage that shows Sergeant Webb being murdered. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Murdered! Dr. Whitmore's voice had gone up an octave. You said it was an IED accident. That's what the official report says. Sullivan's expression was carved from stone. The encrypted footage tells a different story, shows Webb identifying the device, shows him calling it in, shows someone in American tactical gear approaching from behind and remotely detonating the IED before EOD could arrive. Eva's brain was already racing ahead, connecting dots, seeing patterns. Someone on our side, someone who wanted Webb dead and needed it to look like combat casualties. Exactly. Sullivan looked at her with something that might have been approval. Someone who knew that if the footage ever came to light, it would expose not just a murder, but a conspiracy. Webb wasn't just a K-9 handler, he was investigating irregularities in explosive materials. Following a trail that suggested someone was selling American ordnance to insurgent groups. He'd compiled evidence, was ready to blow the whistle. Duncan's voice was pure ice, and they killed him for it. They killed him, and they've been trying to kill Ranger ever since because Ranger's collar contains the only proof. Sullivan leaned forward. The encrypted data can only be accessed with someone with the right biometric signature. Someone Ranger trusts completely. Someone he'll allow close enough to remove the collar without triggering the fail-safe that wipes the data. Eva saw where this was going at a full second before Sullivan said it, and her stomach dropped. Someone like a handler he bonded with in a high-stress situation. Someone whose touch he recognized. Someone he chose. Sullivan's eyes locked on hers. Someone like you, Corman Cross. The room was silent except for the buzz of fluorescent lights and Ranger's soft breathing. Eva looked down at Therash, who gazed back at her with those dark, intelligent eyes. Trusting, loyal, waiting for her to do something, though he couldn't possibly understand what. No. Her voice came out flat, final. I'm retired. I'm not going back. I'm not asking you to go back, Sullivan said. I'm asking you to help us save lives. One more time. 24 hours. That's all. Help us access the footage. Help us protect Ranger until we can bring him somewhere secure. Then you can go back to being Evangeline Thornwood, and I promise you'll never hear from me again." "You can't promise that." Eva's laugh was bitter. "Because you and I both know how this works. It's never just 24 hours, never just one more mission. It's always one more thing, one more risk, one more reason why the person who's already given everything needs to give a little bit more." Duncan cleared his throat. "For what it's worth, I think you should do it." Eva spun to look at him. "You don't understand what you're asking." "Don't I?" Duncan's expression was hard. "I gave my legs for the Corps, gave my friends, gave my marriage when my wife couldn't handle what came back from Fallujah. So yeah, I think I understand exactly what it costs." He gestured to Ranger. "But this dog saved 17 American lives. His handler died trying to expose corruption that's probably still getting people killed. And you're the only one who can help finish what Webb started." "I can't." Eva's voice cracked. "I can't go back to that. Can't be responsible for..." "For what?" Sullivan stood moving around the table with the kind of contained intensity that made Eva's spine straighten despite herself. "For saving lives, for doing the job you were trained to do, for honoring the sacrifice of the 4 Marines you think you failed. Don't." Eva's voice was pure warning. "Don't you dare use them against me." "I'm not using them. I'm reminding you what they would say if they were here." Sullivan stopped 3 feet away, close enough that Eva had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. Ryan Shepard's last words, according to the after-action report, were, "Cross, don't stop, keep saving people." That's what he said. Not give up, not run away, keep saving people. Avia's vision blurred, but she blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. I tried to keep saving people, and it doesn't work. I froze in that ER tonight, watched a man die because I was too scared to step up. Too broken to. You didn't freeze in that ER when it mattered." Duncan interrupted. "When Ranger needed you, when I needed you, you stepped up. Didn't hesitate, didn't calculate the risk. You just acted. That's not broken corpsman. That's what courage looks like when you're carrying the weight of every hard decision you've ever made." Eva closed her eyes, tried to breathe, tried to find some argument that would make Sullivan leave and take his mission and his expectations and his reminder of everything she'd failed to be. But when she opened her eyes again and looked down at Ranger, the dog was still watching her, still trusting, still waiting, just like Ryan had waited, just like all of them had waited, believing she could save them, believing she was good enough and fast enough and strong enough to make the impossible possible. She'd failed 4 of them. Maybe if she tried again, she could avoid making it 5. 24 hours, she heard herself say. Then I'm done, for real this time. Sullivan's expression didn't change, but Eva saw something ease in his shoulders. 24 hours, you have my word. Director Marsh found her voice pitched high with barely controlled panic. Now wait just a minute. You can't seriously expect us to allow this facility to be used for some kind of military operation. We have patients to consider. Liability? Insurance. I absolutely forbid. Ma'am, Sullivan said with the kind of infinite patience that was somehow more threatening than anger, this conversation is above your clearance level. You can cooperate or you can be detained for obstruction of a federal investigation. Your choice. Marsh's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Dr. Whitmore, to his credit, looked more thoughtful. If what you're saying is true, if there really is a conspiracy involving the murder of American service members, then anyone associated with exposing it would be in danger, including this hospital, including our staff. Which is why, Sullivan said, we're not staying here. We're moving Ranger to a secure location. Boston via Medical Center specifically. It's 2 miles away, it's familiar to Colonel Blackwell, and it's a facility full of veterans who understand operational security. Duncan nodded slowly. The Last Watch. Sullivan's eyebrow went up. Sir, the Last Watch, unofficial group, veterans who meet at the VA every week. Most of us are 60 plus. Most of us saw combat. We look out for each other, help with appointments, paperwork, just being there when things get dark. Duncan's jaw set. If you need people who can be trusted to keep their mouths shut and their eyes open, I know exactly who to call. Eva felt something shift in her chest. Not quite hope, but something adjacent. The possibility that she wouldn't have to face this alone. That there were still people who remembered what it meant to stand together when everything was falling apart. Sullivan was already pulling out his phone. How many? 5, maybe 6 if they're available on short notice? Duncan started counting on scarred fingers. Silas Merrick, Sniper Gulf War. Tobias Grant, EOD Iraq. Nathaniel Dawson Infantry can't walk anymore, but his brain's sharp. Frederick Shaw Combat Engineer. Jeremiah Rivers Corpsman like Eva here. All of them trustworthy. With my life. Duncan's voice was absolute. Already trusted them with worse. Sullivan nodded once. Make the calls. Tell them we need them at the VA in 2 hours. Full of briefing when they arrive. And tell them, he paused, choosing words carefully. Tell them this is the real thing. Not a drill, not a favor. A mission. Duncan pulled out a battered cell phone and Eva saw his hands tremble slightly as he dialed the first number. Age or adrenaline, or maybe just the weight of asking old warriors to fight one more battle when they'd already given everything. While Duncan made his calls, Sullivan gestured Eva toward the far corner of the room. She followed, aware of Ranger's eyes tracking her movement, aware of Marsh and Whitmore watching like spectators at a car crash. I need you to understand something, Sullivan said quietly, a voice pitched so only Eva could hear. I didn't come here to drag you back into service. I came here because 3 days ago, FBI, a counterintelligence, flagged a security breach at this hospital. Eva went very still. What kind of breach? Someone accessed employee records, specifically yours, 3 separate times over the past month. Different IP addresses all routed through proxies, but the target was always the same. Evangeline Thornwood's personnel file. Her pulse kicked up. Who? We don't know yet, but whoever it is, they were looking for something. And 2 hours ago, we intercepted communications suggesting they know about Ranger. Know he's with Colonel Blackwell. Know he was brought to this hospital. Sullivan's expression was grim. They're coming, Eva. Whether you help us or not, they're coming. The only question is whether you're going to be ready when they do. Eva's mind was racing, cataloging exits, defensive positions, vulnerabilities. Old training kicking in despite 3 years of trying to suppress it. You think they'll hit the hospital? No, too public, too risky. But the VA, Sullivan grimaced. Late at night, minimal staff, mostly elderly patients who won't put up much resistance. If they're smart, that's where they'll make their move. Then we evacuate, move Ranger somewhere else, somewhere they can't find him. They'll find him. These people have resources, Eva. Government resources, probably. The kind that can track a military working dog anywhere in the continental United States. Sullivan's voice dropped even lower. The only way to end this is to get the footage, expose the conspiracy, and make it so public that killing Ranger doesn't matter anymore. Information wants to be free once it's out. Eva wanted to argue, wanted to find a hole in the logic. But she'd spent 7 years in environments where staying alive meant thinking 3 moves ahead, and she couldn't see an alternative that didn't end with Ranger dead and the evidence lost forever. Across the room, Duncan was wrapping up his last call, his expression somewhere between determined and exhausted. They're in, he announced. All 5. 2 hours Boston fee or ready for whatever comes. Sullivan nodded. Outstanding. We'll convoy over, get set up, brief everyone, and establish a secure perimeter. Corpsman Cross will work with Ranger to access the encrypted data. Once we have the footage, we upload it to secure servers, distribute it to multiple agencies simultaneously, and make it physically impossible to contain. And then, Eva heard herself ask, and then Ranger retires for real, goes home with Colonel Blackwell, lives out his days as a very good boy who doesn't have to work anymore. The bad guys go to prison. Justice gets served. Sullivan met her eyes. And you get to disappear again, if that's what you want. Clean slate, no more looking over your shoulder. It sounded too easy, too neat. Eva had learned the hard way that clean slates didn't exist, that the past had teeth, and it never stopped biting. But looking at Ranger, at Duncan, at the possibility of actually finishing something instead of running from it, Eva found she didn't have it in her to say no. Fine, 2 hours, via hospital. Then we do this and I walk away. Deal. Sullivan extended his hand. Eva shook it, feeling the calluses that matched her own, the grip of someone who'd made too many hard decisions and somehow kept going anyway. Director Marsh cleared her throat with obvious reluctance. Admiral, if we're finished here, I need to discuss the liability implications of— You need to forget this conversation ever happened, Sullivan said flatly. National security need to know. You don't need to know. Clear. Marsh looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Sullivan's expression made her nod jerkily instead. Sullivan turned to Eva. You'll need gear, body armor, medical supplies, communications equipment. We can provide all of that. I don't carry weapons, Eva said automatically. I'm aware. You're a medic, but that doesn't mean you're going in unprotected. Sullivan's phone buzzed and he glanced at it, expression darkening. We need to move. Now. FBI just picked up chatter suggesting the timeline's been accelerated. How accelerated? They might hit tonight as early as 0300 hours. Sullivan was already moving toward the door, gesturing for his team, which means we have 6 hours to turn a VA hospital into a defensible position and hope to God that 6 old veterans and 1 combat medic are enough to hold off however many contractors they send. Eva felt ice settle in her stomach. Contractors? You're sure it's not military? Positive this is private sector. Mercenaries, former special operations probably, but no longer bound by rules of engagement or the UCMJ. They'll come hard, come fast, and they won't care about collateral damage. Duncan was already maneuvering his wheelchair toward the door, Ranger moving to heel position beside him. Then we'd better make sure the last watch lives up to its name. They moved through the hospital in a convoy that drew stares from the skeleton crew working the night shift. 7 SEALs, 1 rear admiral, 1 fired nurse, 1 old Marine in a wheelchair, and 1 limping K-9. The kind of procession that would become legend in the hospital break rooms by morning, if any of them lived that long. The October night had deepened while they'd been inside, temperature dropping toward freezing sky, clear enough that Eva could see stars between the light pollution. The SUVs waited like patient predators, engines idling, and Sullivan directed traffic with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Eva found herself in the second vehicle with Duncan Ranger and 2 of the SEALs. Nobody spoke during the short drive to the VA hospital. Just the hum of the engine, the occasional crackle of radio traffic, and Ranger's soft panting as he settled on the floor between Eva's feet. She reached down without thinking, let her fingers find that spot behind his ear that made him relax. The dog leaned into her touch, trusting, and Eva felt the weight of that trust like a physical thing pressing on her chest. Ryan Shepard had trusted her too. So had Lance Corporal David Martinez, Private First Class James Chen, and Sergeant William Torres. She'd tried, God, she'd tried, but trying hadn't been enough, and living with that failure had been slowly killing her for 3 years. Maybe tonight she'd either find a way to make peace with it, or she'd die trying. Either way, at least she'd know she hadn't run. The Boston Via Medical Center loomed ahead, a brick building that had seen better decades, maintained by a government that consistently underfunded the people it had sent to war. But the lights were on, and as the convoy pulled up, Eva saw figures emerging from the entrance. 5 of them, old, weathered, moving with the careful deliberation of bodies that had been pushed too hard too many times. But their eyes were clear, their backs straight, and when Duncan rolled down his window to wave, they moved forward as a unit. The last watch, Eva thought, and maybe, just maybe, enough. The fluorescent lights in the VA hospital conference room flickered with the irregular rhythm of old wiring and deferred maintenance, casting shadows that made everyone look 10 years older and 100 years more tired. Eva stood near the back wall, arms crossed, watching 5 men who should have been home in bed arrange themselves around a table scarred with coffee rings and decades of bureaucratic meetings that had promised much and delivered little. Silas Merrick claimed the seat nearest the door, 68 years old, with the kind of lean build that came from a metabolism that had never quite recovered from years of eating MRS in 100-degree heat. His eyes were pale blue, tracking every movement in the room with the automatic precision of someone who'd spent decades looking for threats before they materialized. Old sniper habits, they never quite went away. Beside him, Tobias Grant settled into his chair with the careful movements of someone whose back had been rebuilt more than once. 65 thick through the shoulders, hands that looked like they could still defuse a bomb in the dark while under fire. EOD, explosive ordnance disposal. The kind of men who saw the worst humanity could build and still walk toward it instead of away. Nathaniel Dawson didn't bother with the chairs. His wheelchair was state-of-the-art, probably paid for by donations rather than the VA, and he positioned himself at the head of the table like he'd been born to command. 71 years old infantry, both legs gone below the knee, but his spine still rigid with the posture of a man who'd led soldiers into hell and brought most of them back. Frederick Shaw sat across from him, 64, wearing coveralls that suggested he'd come straight from a construction site without stopping to change. Combat engineer, the kind who could look at any building and see a fortress, see the choke points and kill zones and structural vulnerabilities that made the difference between victory and body bags. And at the far end, Jeremiah Rivers leaned back in his chair with the kind of easy confidence that came from spending 40 years dealing with trauma and coming out the other side mostly intact. 62 former Navy corpsmen like Eva, gray beard, neatly trimmed eyes that saw too much and understood more. These were the last watch. Rear Admiral Sullivan stood at the whiteboard tactical map of the VA hospital. already sketched in dry erase marker, and Eva watched him assess the men in front of him, saw the moment he made his calculation. Old, battered, past their prime by every conventional metric. But conventional metrics didn't account for the kind of knowledge you earned by surviving what should have killed you. Gentlemen, Sullivan began, his voice carrying the weight of a man about to ask for something he had no right to request. Thank you for coming on short notice. What I'm about to tell you is classified. Need to know. And as of right now, you need to know. He gestured to Eva. This is Corpsman Evelyn Cross. Some of you may know her as Evangeline Thornwood. 7 years Navy medical, 2 combat deployments, recommended for Silver Star. Currently retired, but circumstances have changed. Jeremiah's eyebrows went up. Cross, I've heard that name. Damascus 2020, the one who saved 23 raiders. Eva's jaw tightened. She wanted to correct him to mention the 4 she hadn't saved, but Sullivan continued before she could speak. Sullivan moved to stand beside Duncan's wheelchair. Colonel Blackwell, you know. His Foster K-9 Ranger is at the center of this situation. He tapped the map. 3 months ago, Ranger's handler Sergeant Marcus Webb was killed in Afghanistan. Official report says IED, accident. Reality is murder. Ranger's collar contains encrypted evidence that proves it. The room went very still. The kind of still that happened when combat veterans heard something that made their blood run cold. The people responsible have been trying to eliminate Ranger ever since. They know he's here. They know we're trying to access the encrypted data, and intelligence suggests they're going to hit this facility tonight. 0300 hours, maybe earlier. Nathaniel leaned forward, fingers steepled. How many? Estimated 8 to 12 contractors, former special operations, well-armed, well-trained, no rules of engagement, led by a man named Marcus Vane, former SEAL, dishonorably discharged in 2019 for selling classified tactical information. He's been working as a mercenary ever since. Eva's spine went rigid. Vane. Sullivan looked at her. You know him? I testified at his court-martial. He sold weapon specs to insurgent groups. Got 3 Marines killed in an ambush because the enemy knew our tactical response patterns. Her voice was flat, but her hands had clenched into fists. He swore he'd make me pay for it. Then this is personal for him, Sullivan said grimly, which makes him more dangerous. Vane doesn't just want the evidence destroyed. He wants revenge. Duncan's hand tightened on his wheelchair armrest. And our resources, Sullivan's expression was grave. 5 SEALs on perimeter security, me, Corpsman Cross, Colonel Blackwell, and the 5 of you if you're willing. Silas's laugh was dry as desert sand. You're asking 6 men averaging 67 years old to defend a hospital against a dozen contractors who are probably half our age and twice as fast. Yes. Good. Silas cracked his knuckles. Been waiting for something worth the arthritis pain. Tobias was already studying the map, thick fingers tracing corridors and exits. What about evacuations? How many patients are we talking about? 47 in the critical care wing can't be moved without risking their lives. Everyone else has been quietly relocated over the past hour under the guise of facility maintenance. Sullivan's voice hardened. Those 47 are our responsibility. And they're all veterans. They've given enough. They don't deserve to die because someone in our own government sold them out. Frederick stood, moved to the map, started making notes in the margins. Critical care is here, 2nd floor east wing. Single stairwell access elevator. If we control those choke points, we control who gets to the patients. Exactly. Sullivan looked at Eva. Corpsman Cross will be in the critical care wing with Ranger, working to decrypt the caller data. That's our primary objective. Everything else is about buying her time. Eva stepped forward, uncomfortable with the weight of 6 pairs of eyes suddenly focused on her. I don't need you to die for me. If it comes down to extracting the data or protecting lives, we protect lives, always. Jeremiah smiled slightly, spoken like a corpsman. But here's the thing, sister, we're not dying for you, we're dying with you if it comes to that. There's a difference. Is there? Yeah. Nathaniel's voice was rough. One means you carry the guilt. The other means you honor the choice. We're choosing to be here, choosing to stand. That's not on you. Ava wanted to argue, but something in their expressions stopped her. These men had made this decision decades ago in different wars and different circumstances. They knew the cost, knew it intimately, and they'd decided it was worth paying. Who was she to tell them they were wrong? Sullivan checked his watch. It's 21:45 hours. That gives us 4 hours and 15 minutes to turn this facility into a defensible position and hope our intel is accurate. If they come earlier, we adapt. If they don't come at all, they'll come. Silas's voice was absolute. Men like Vane, men who murder their own, they don't leave loose ends. They'll come hard and fast, expecting soft resistance. We're going to teach them different. The planning took 90 minutes. Frederick sketched modifications to the building layout, identifying structural weaknesses they could exploit. Tobias walked the perimeter with two of the SEALs placing improvised detection systems that wouldn't stop an assault but would buy precious seconds of warning. Silas claimed the roof access, setting up a sniper position that commanded the main approaches. Nathaniel positioned himself at the central nursing station where he could monitor security cameras and coordinate communications. His wheelchair made him look vulnerable, which was exactly the point. Let them underestimate the man with no legs. Let them get close enough to learn that lesson the hard way. Jeremiah worked with Eva to set up a triage station in critical care, stockpiling medical supplies they hoped they wouldn't need but probably would. As they worked, he spoke quietly, his voice carrying the cadence of someone who'd given this speech before. First time's always hardest. Going back into combat after you thought you were done. Mind plays tricks, makes you think you've lost it, lost the edge, lost whatever made you good at this in the first place. Eva organized bandages and IV supplies with automatic efficiency. What if I have, then you fake it till it comes back? Jeremiah's smile was sad. I did 3 tours. Came home thinking I was fine. Took 6 months before I realized I wasn't sleeping, wasn't eating right, was jumping every time a car backfired. Took another year to admit I needed help. Took 5 before I stopped feeling like a failure for needing it. Did it get better? Some days I still wake up thinking I'm 25 and in a field hospital in Kuwait and I don't know why my knees hurt or why there's gray in my beard. He paused, looking at her directly. But then I remember. Remember the ones I saved. Remember that the guilt I carry means I gave a damn. And giving a damn cross, that's what makes us different from the ones coming tonight. Eva wanted to believe him, wanted to think that 3 years of running had been enough distance, enough time, enough penance for the 4 names she couldn't save. But as she worked her training taking over, despite the fear coiling in her gut, she realized it didn't matter what she believed. What mattered was the 47 veterans sleeping in beds 30 feet away, trusting that the system would protect them the way they'd once protected everyone else. What mattered was Ranger currently resting in the corner, with Duncan keeping watch, that encrypted collar containing evidence that could bring down a conspiracy. What mattered was doing the also even if it destroyed her, because that's what the oath meant. First, do no harm. But when harm came looking, you stood between it and the people who couldn't defend themselves. At 100 hours, Eva found herself alone with Ranger in a small room adjacent to critical care. The dog sat patiently while she examined his collar, looking for the access point Sullivan had described. It was subtle, hidden in what looked like a reinforced buckle, but her fingers found the slight depression that served as a biometric scanner. She pressed her thumb against it, and nothing happened. Tried again. Still nothing. It's not just a thumbprint, Sullivan said from the doorway, making her jump. It reads multiple factors: heartbeat, temperature, stress hormones. It's designed to only respond to someone the dog trusts completely in a calm situation. If you're scared, if Ranger's scared, if there's any indication of coercion, the failsafe activates and wipes the data. Eva looked at Ranger, who gazed back with those dark, trusting eyes. So I have to convince him everything's fine while we're sitting in a hospital waiting for armed mercenaries to attack. Essentially, yes. That's insane. That's military intelligence security protocols. Sullivan moved into the room, closed the door behind him. They wanted to make sure the data couldn't be extracted under duress, made it so the dog had to actively cooperate, and the handler had to be someone the dog bonded with naturally. Eva sat down on the floor cross-legged, and Ranger immediately moved closer, resting his head on her knee. Her hand found that spot behind his ear automatically, and she felt him relax into her touch. He trusts you, Sullivan observed. Trusted you in that ER when he didn't trust anyone else. That's not training, that's recognition. Of what? Of someone who understands, who's been there, who knows what it costs to keep going when everything hurts. Sullivan sat down in the room's single chair, and for a moment he didn't look like a rear admiral. He looked like a tired man carrying too much weight for too long. I should have stopped you from resigning. Eva's hand stilled on Ranger's head. Sir, 3 years ago, when you came to me, told me you couldn't do it anymore, that you needed out. I should have fought harder, should have made you talk to someone, get real help instead of just signing the papers and watching you disappear. You couldn't have stopped me? Maybe not, but I could have tried. Sullivan's voice was heavy. Instead, I let the Corps lose one of the best combat medics I've ever seen. Let you lose yourself to guilt that wasn't yours to carry. That's on me. Eva was quiet for a long moment, focusing on Ranger's breathing, the steady rise and fall of his ribs. I wasn't ready to hear it then. Wouldn't have mattered what you said. And now I'm sitting in a VA hospital at 1 a.m, waiting to see if I remember how to not get people killed. Eva's laugh was bitter. So probably not much better, sir. Sullivan leaned forward, elbows on knees. For what it's worth, Cross, I think you are exactly where you need to be, doing exactly what you were meant to do. And those 4 Marines you think you failed, I've talked to their families. Every single one of them said the same thing. They're grateful you were there, grateful their sons didn't die alone, grateful someone cared enough to try. Trying wasn't enough. It never is. That's the tragedy of medicine. We try, we fail, and we have to find a way to keep trying anyway because the alternative is giving up. And I don't think you know how to do that. Eva wanted to argue, but she couldn't find the words. Because maybe he was right. Maybe she'd spent 3 years running, not because she'd given up, but because she hadn't known how to keep trying without being crushed by the weight of it. The radio on Sullivan's belt crackled. Admiral, this is Overwatch. We've got movement. 3 vehicles approaching from the north. No lights. Estimate 6 minutes to contact. Sullivan was on his feet instantly, all business. Copy that, sound general quarters, all personnel to defensive positions. This is not a drill. He looked at Eva. Whatever happens, you stay with Ranger. You get that collar data. Everything else is secondary. Sir, I'm a medic. If people get hurt, then Jeremiah handles it. Your job is the mission. Let us do ours. He paused at the door. And Cross, when this is over, when the dust settles, we're going to talk. Really talk. About Damascus, about the guilt, about what comes next. No more running. Deal? Eva's throat was tight. Deal, sir. He nodded once and was gone, his footsteps fading down the corridor as the hospital transformed around her. Lights dimmed, doors locked, the soft sounds of old men moving to positions they'd hoped never to occupy again. Eva looked at Ranger. Just you and me now, Marine. Let's see if we can make this work. She pressed her thumb to the scanner again, and this time focusing on keeping her breathing steady, on projecting calm. She didn't feel something clicked. The collar hummed softly, a small LED blinking green, and a voice spoke from a hidden speaker. Biometric authentication accepted. Handler recognized. Please state verification code. Eva's mind went blank. Verification code. Sullivan hadn't mentioned a verification code. Ranger whined softly, looking up at her, and Eva's hand tightened in his fur. I don't know the code, she whispered. I don't... The dog's tail thumped once against the floor. Twice. 3 times. And Eva remembered. Remembered Sullivan's briefing, remembered the details she thought was throwaway information. Ranger's original handler, Sergeant Marcus Webb, his call sign. Ironside, Eva said clearly. Verification code Ironside. The LED blinked twice, then steady green. Code accepted. Downloading encrypted files. Time to completion, 7 minutes. 7 minutes. Eva could work with 7 minutes. Outside, she heard the first gunshots. The sound of automatic weapons fire in a hospital was wrong on every fundamental level. It violated the Geneva Conventions, the basic social contract that said medical facilities were neutral ground. But the men coming through the VA hospital's lower entrances didn't care about conventions or contracts. They cared about eliminating evidence in anyone who stood in their way. Silas Merrick saw them first from his rooftop position, 12 figures in tactical gear, moving with professional coordination through the parking lot. He keyed his radio with one hand, brought his rifle to bear with the other. Overwatch to all stations, 12 hostiles confirmed, breaching main entrance and loading dock simultaneously. Weapons hot, engaging. His first shot took the point man in the chest center mass and the figure dropped. The rest scattered seeking cover, but they were in the open and Silas had the high ground. 2 more shots, 2 more targets down before they made it to the building. In the central nursing station, Nathaniel Dawson watched security monitors with the detached calm of someone who'd seen worse. 3 hostiles entering through loading dock. Tobias, they're coming your way. In the basement, Tobias Grant stood beside a stack of medical waste containers he'd repositioned to create a narrow corridor. The kind of corridor where men had to advance single file where they couldn't use their numbers to advantage. The door opened. Flashlights cut through the darkness. Tobias waited until all 3 were inside, until they'd committed to the corridor, until there was no easy retreat. Then he triggered the improvised flashbang he'd constructed from materials that absolutely weren't supposed to be used that way, and the corridor became chaos. Disoriented, blinded, the contractors stumbled directly into the choke point Frederick Shaw had built, and Frederick's shotgun boomed twice in the confined space. On the second floor, Eva heard the battle raging below and forced herself to focus on Ranger. The download progress bar on the collar's small screen showed 60%. 4 minutes left. 4 minutes while people died to buy her time. The door to her room crashed open. A contractor stood there, rifle raised, face hidden behind a tactical mask. But Eva recognized the build, the movement patterns, the way he held his weapon. Marcus Vane. Well, well. His voice was muffled by the mask, but still recognizable. Still carrying that edge of arrogance that had made him dangerous even before he'd turned traitor. Corman Cross, the bitch who destroyed my career. He pulled off the mask and Eva saw his face for the first time in 7 years. Older, harder, with the kind of hollowness in his eyes that came from crossing lines you couldn't uncross. Target acquired, he said into his radio. I'll handle this personally. Eva's brain froze, but her body remembered. Years of training kicked in, and she threw herself sideways, dragging Ranger with her as the first burst of gunfire chewed through the wall where she'd been sitting. Vane advanced weapon tracking. You took everything from me, Cross. My career, my pension, my honor. All because you couldn't keep your mouth shut about a few weapon sales. You got 3 Marines killed, Eva said, her back against the wall. Ranger pressed against her side. The collar still glowing, still downloading, 70%. You sold our tactical responses to insurgents. They died because of you. They died because they were weak. Because this country is weak. Sending boys to fight wars while bureaucrats get rich. Vane's rifle didn't waver. I just decided to get my share. And you ruined it. So this is revenge. You're going to murder a dog and a medic because you got caught being a traitor. No. Vane smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made Eva's blood run cold. I'm going to kill you because it'll feel good. The dog's just business. He raised the rifle finger, tightening on the trigger. Then Duncan Blackwell's wheelchair crashed through the doorway, and the old Marine had a pistol Eva hadn't known he was carrying. His first shot hit Vane in the shoulder, spinning him. His second went wide, but it was enough to make the man stagger back. Get down, Duncan roared, and Eva flattened herself over Ranger as Duncan fired twice more. Vane's body armor caught both rounds, but the impact drove him backward into the hallway. He returned fire, and Eva saw Duncan jerk as rounds hit his chest. No! Eva started to move, but Duncan's hand came up, stopping her. Stay, he gasped, blood spreading across his shirt. Mission first. Always mission first. Vane stepped back into the doorway, his rifle trained on Duncan. Old man, you should have stayed out of this. Should have. Duncan's voice was wet, bubbling. But then I wouldn't have gotten to do this. He triggered something in his other hand, and Eva realized too late what it was. One of Tobias's improvised flashbangs set for a 2-second delay. Duncan threw it at Vane's feet. The explosion in the confined hallway was deafening, and Vane screamed, stumbling back, temporarily blinded. Duncan slumped in his wheelchair, pistol dropping from nerveless fingers, but he was smiling. That's for the Corps, he whispered. Eva was already moving, grabbing her medical bag, but she knew from the placement of the blood, the way Duncan was breathing, that he had minutes at best. Vane recovered faster than she'd hoped, raising his rifle again, despite the ringing in his ears. You're all dead. All of you. Then Jeremiah Rivers was there, appearing in the hallway behind Vane like a ghost. His hands moved with the precision of 40 years of combat medicine, but he wasn't healing now. He was fighting. A pressure point strike to Vane's neck, a knee to the back of his leg, and the contractor went down. Jeremiah kicked the rifle away, secured Vane with zip ties from his medical kit, and moved immediately to Duncan. How bad? Bad. Eva's voice cracked. Lung, maybe heart. I know what you need. Jeremiah was already setting up his movements automatic. We've got this. You focus on that collar. Eva looked at the device. 90%, 2 minutes. She looked at Duncan, who was fading fast. Go, Duncan whispered. Finish it. For Webb. For all of them. Eva's training warred with her heart. The mission versus the man. The choice she'd made in Damascus, the one that still woke her up at night. But this time there was Jeremiah. This time she wasn't alone. Keep him alive, she told Jeremiah, her voice steady despite the tears on her face. That's an order. Aye, aye, Corman. Jeremiah was already working his hands sure and steady. Eva turned back to Ranger, to the collar that was at 95%, and she focused everything she had on staying calm, on keeping the dog relaxed, on finishing what Webb had died to preserve. In the hallway, Vane stirred, trying to speak through the pain. You think this changes anything? You think one video will stop them? The conspiracy goes deeper than you know. Congressmen, generals. They'll bury this like they bury everything. Maybe, Eva said without looking at him, but at least Webb's death will mean something. At least people will know the truth. 98%. Around them, the sounds of battle were dying down. Radio chatter confirming hostiles neutralized, buildings secure. The last watch had held, 99%. Duncan's breathing was rattling wet. Jeremiah worked frantically, but Eva could see it in his face. Could see that same terrible knowledge she'd carried from Damascus. Sometimes you did everything right, and it still wasn't enough, 100%. The caller chimed softly. Download complete. Files successfully extracted and transmitted to secure servers. Secondary protocol engaged. Backup copies distributed to FBI, D, Inspector General, and Congressional Oversight Committees. Data release authorized. Evidence package includes video footage, audio recordings, financial transaction records, and classified communications. Distribution complete. Mission accomplished. Eva looked at Vane, who'd gone very pale. It's over. Everything Webb collected, everything you tried to hide. It's out there now, uncontainable, unstoppable. The man's expression shifted from rage to something like despair. You have no idea what you've just done, who you've just made an enemy of. Good. Eva's voice was ice. Let them come. We'll be ready. Sullivan burst through the door, followed by 2 SEALs. He took in the scene instantly. Duncan bleeding out. Jeremiah working. Vane secured. Ava with Ranger, the collar still glowing. Status: mission complete, sir. Evidence transmitted. Distribution confirmed. Eva's voice was professional, detached, the way she'd been trained to report. Colonel Blackwell is critical. GSW to the chest. Possible cardiac involvement. Sullivan keyed his radio. I need a medevac now. Critical GSW veteran priority alpha. He looked at Vane. And get this piece of trash out of my sight. FBI custody. Fullest charges. The SEALs hauled Vane to his feet, and as they dragged him away, he looked back at Eva one last time. This isn't over, Cross. It's never over. Maybe not, Eva said quietly, but today we won, and that's enough. The next hours blurred together in a haze of adrenaline crash and exhausted efficiency. Duncan was rushed to surgery, his chances rated as poor but possible. The FBI descended on the scene like a swarm, cataloging evidence, taking statements, beginning the long process of unraveling a conspiracy that had roots deeper than anyone had imagined. Eva sat in the critical care wing with Ranger, both of them too wired to sleep, watching the sunrise paint the windows in shades of gold and red. Around her, the 47 veterans were waking up, most of them unaware that a battle had been fought for their lives while they slept. Jeremiah found her there, looking as exhausted as she felt. He sat down beside her without speaking, and for a long time they just existed together in the quiet. Duncan made it through surgery, he said finally. Touch and go, but he's stable. Doctors say he's got a chance. Eva's eyes closed. Thank God. Thank Duncan. Man's too stubborn to die. Says he's got students to teach and a dog to take care of. Jeremiah smiled slightly. Says he's not leaving either of those responsibilities unfinished. The others. Silas took a graze across the ribs, already complaining about the hospital food. Tobias is deaf in one ear from his own flashbang, but he says it's worth it. Frederick sprained his ankle. Nathaniel's wheelchair has 3 new bullet holes, but he's fine. Wants to keep it as a souvenir. Jeremiah's smile widened. We did it, Cross, the last watch held. At what cost? The only cost that matters. We're alive. The bad guys aren't. And justice is about to rain down on people who thought they were untouchable. As if to punctuate his words, Eva's phone buzzed. A news alert. She opened it with numb fingers. Breaking major corruption scandal rocks Pentagon. Encrypted evidence reveals murder of Army whistleblower conspiracy involving $2 billion in fraudulent defense contracts. FBI makes first arrests more expected. Another alert. Former Navy SEAL Marcus Vane arrested in connection with attack on a hospital. Charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, and treason. Another. Congressional hearing scheduled for evidence that implicates sitting lawmakers in defense fraud scheme. Jeremiah read over her shoulder. That's going to get loud. Good, Eva said. Let it get loud. Let everyone know what Webb died trying to expose. Let it mean something. Sullivan found them an hour later, looking like he'd aged a decade overnight. But there was satisfaction in his eyes, the kind that came from a mission completed despite impossible odds. FBI wants statements from everyone. DOD is launching a full investigation. Congressional oversight is screaming for hearings. He sat down heavily. This is going to be the biggest military scandal since Abu Ghraib. Heads are going to roll. Careers are going to end. And it all started because one nurse refused to follow protocol and helped a veteran's dog. Eva managed a tired smile. Technically, I'm not a nurse anymore. You fired me, remember? About that, Sullivan pulled out a folder. The Navy wants you back. Full reinstatement. Promotion to hospital corpsman first class. Your choice of duty station, and a formal apology for any suggestion that you should have done anything other than what you did. Eva took the folder but didn't open it. I need conditions. Name them. I want to stay here. At the Boston VA, I want to help build a combat medic training program. Teach young corpsmen what it really means to serve. Not just the technical skills, but the other part. The part about carrying the weight and finding a way to stand anyway. Done. And I want the program named after Sergeant Marcus Webb and the 4 Marines I lost in Damascus. The Webb Shepherd Memorial Combat Medical Training Center. Eva's voice was steady despite the emotion behind it. So every student who goes through it knows their names, knows their sacrifice, knows that we remember. Sullivan nodded slowly. The Webb Shepherd Memorial. I like it. Honors them both. The one who exposed the truth and the ones who died believing in it. There's one more thing. Go ahead. I want Dr. Whitmore arrested. Eva's voice went hard. He's the one who leaked my information, the one who told them where to find Ranger. He's as guilty as Vane. Sullivan's expression darkened. Already done. FBI picked him up 2 hours ago. Turns out he had gambling debts, $500,000. Someone paid them off in exchange for information. He's looking at conspiracy charges, accessory to attempted murder, and about 6 other federal crimes. Good. Eva felt a grim satisfaction. He took an oath, too. He violated it for money. Let him face the consequences. Over the next 3 weeks, Eva watched the scandal unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. 37 arrests in the first wave, 2 sitting congressmen, 8 defense contractors, a dozen Pentagon officials. More charges pending as investigators followed the money trail deeper into the corruption. Marcus Vane, facing enough charges to keep him in federal prison for the rest of his life, tried to cut a deal. Offered to testify against his co-conspirators. The FBI took his testimony, but made no promises about leniency. Duncan recovered slowly but steadily, his stubborn refusal to die serving him well through complications and setbacks. By the 3rd week, he was sitting up in bed demanding to know when he could get back to work. The last watch needs its colonel, he told Eva during one of her visits, and Ranger needs his handler. Can't do either from a hospital bed. You took a bullet to the chest, sir. You're 70 years old. Maybe it's time to rest. I'll rest when I'm dead. Duncan's grin was fierce. Which won't be for another 20 years if I have anything to say about it. On a cold morning in early December, Eva stood in the same ceremony room at the Boston VA hospital where she'd once been fired for violating protocol. Now she wore a dress uniform that still felt strange after 3 years in civilian clothes, and the room was packed with people she'd never expected to see again. The last watch, all of them ambulatory now, some sporting canes or bandages, but all standing proud. Sullivan in his service whites looking almost relaxed for the first time since she'd known him. FBI agents who'd worked the case. And families. 23 families from Damascus whose sons had come home because of her. 4 more families whose sons hadn't made it, but whose parents had asked to be here anyway. The citation was being read, the words washing over her with surreal quality. Valor, dedication, sacrifice. It all sounded too noble, too clean, for something that had been messy and terrified and desperate. But when the silver star was pinned to her chest, when the room filled with applause, when Ryan Shepard's mother came forward and embraced her with tears streaming down both their faces, Eva felt something shift inside her chest. Not absolution. She didn't think she'd ever stop carrying the 4 names, stop wondering if she could have done something different. But maybe acceptance. Maybe the understanding that carrying their names meant they hadn't been forgotten. That the guilt she felt was proof that they'd mattered. That trying and failing was still better than not trying at all. Afterward, Sullivan handed her 4 letters he'd been carrying for 3 years. Letters from the families of the Marines she hadn't saved. She read them alone in a quiet corner, and everyone said the same thing in different words. Thank you for being there. Thank you for trying. Thank you for making sure he didn't die alone. One letter from Ryan Shepard's younger sister Sarah included a photograph and a note. He wrote about you in his last letter home. Said you were the best corpsman he'd ever known. Said if anything happened to him, he hoped you'd keep saving people. He believed in you. We believe in you. Please don't let his faith be wasted. Eva folded the letters carefully, placed them in her dress uniform pocket, and walked out to find the world had changed while she'd been reading. Duncan was standing, actually standing, supported by a walker and clearly in pain, but vertical in a way the doctors had said might never happen again. The last watch surrounded him, and when Eva approached, they all came to attention. "Corman Cross," Duncan said formally. "On behalf of the last watch, we request the honor of your presence at our weekly meeting. Tuesdays, 1900 hours. Villa Hospital Conference Room. We've voted. You're one of us now." Eva's throat was tight. "Sir, I'm not." "You're exactly what we are," Nathaniel interrupted from his wheelchair. "Someone who stood when it mattered. Someone who knows the cost and paid it anyway. Someone who belongs." Silas nodded. "Besides, we need someone who can actually run if things get exciting. We're all too old for that shit." The laughter that followed was warm and genuine, and Eva found herself smiling despite the tears in her eyes. "I'd be honored, gentlemen." 6 months later, the Webb Shepherd Memorial Combat Medical Training Center opened its doors to its first class of 30 students. The facility occupied a renovated wing of the Boston VA Hospital with classrooms, simulation labs, and a memorial wall that bore photographs of Sergeant Marcus Webb and the 4 Marines from Damascus. Eva stood at the front of the classroom, Ranger lying calm at her feet in his retirement vest that read, "Therapy dog, do not pet while working." The students watched her with a mixture of nervousness and determination, and Eva saw herself at their age in every uncertain face. "My name is Hospital Corpsman First Class Evelyn Cross." She began, her voice carrying the authority of experience and the humility of failure. "Some of you may have heard stories about Damascus, about silver stars, about heroism. Forget all of that. What I'm here to teach you isn't how to be a hero. It's how to do the job when everything's falling apart, when people are dying, and when you have to make choices that will haunt you." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "I'm here to teach you that protocol matters, but people matter more. That trying and failing is better than not trying at all. That the oath we take as medics isn't just words. It's a sacred trust, a commitment to stand between death and the people who need us for as long as we can stand." She gestured to the memorial funeral behind her. "These are some of the people who taught me what it means to be a corpsman. Sergeant Marcus Webb, who died exposing a corruption because it was the right thing to do. Corporal Ryan Shepard, Lance Corporal David Martinez, Private First Class James Chen, and Sergeant William Torres. 4 Marines I couldn't save in Damascus. 4 names I carry every single day." Her voice didn't waver. She'd learned to speak these names without breaking. "I also saved 23 Marines that day. 23 men who went home to their families because I made a choice. The hardest choice, to focus on who I could save instead of who I was losing." A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "Ma'am, how do you live with that, knowing you chose?" Eva met her eyes steadily. "You learn that medicine isn't about perfection. It's about doing the best you can with what you have. You grieve, you carry the weight, and you wake up the next day and try again because that's what they would want. That's what the oath demands." Another student, older, with the look of prior service. "What if we freeze? What if we fail when it matters? Then you're human." Eva's voice was gentle but firm. "Every person in this room will freeze at some point, will make a mistake, will lose a patient they think they should have saved. The difference between a good corpsman and a great one isn't never failing. It's learning from the failure and still showing up the next day." She walked to the window, looked out at the VA hospital grounds where the last watch was gathering for their weekly meeting. Duncan walking with a cane, now Ranger at his side. Silas, Tobias, Nathaniel, Frederick, and Jeremiah. Old warriors who taught her that standing together made the weight bearable. "You won't do this alone," she told the students. "You'll have battle buddies, fellow corpsmen, mentors like the last watch who teach here every week. You'll have each other, and you'll have the knowledge that what you're learning here was paid for by people who believed it mattered." She turned back to face them. "This training will be hard. You'll be pushed beyond what you think you can handle. You'll face scenarios that seem impossible. And at the end of it, you'll walk out of here knowing that you can stand in the worst moments of someone's life and give them a chance to see tomorrow." A student in the back raised his hand. "Is it worth it?" "All of it. The trauma, the guilt, the weight." Eva thought about Duncan taking a bullet to protect her, about the last watch standing against impossible odds, about 23 Marines who'd lived to have families and careers and futures, about 4 names that would never be forgotten as long as she drew breath. "Yes," she said simply, "it's worth it, every single moment, because this isn't just a dream, it's a calling. And if you're in this room, if you're willing to take this oath, then you've already answered that calling." She moved to the memorial wall and placed her hand on Ryan Shepard's photograph. We make a promise when we become corpsmen. First, do no harm, but also do everything in your power to help. Stand when others run. Try when others quit. Remember when others forget. Eva faced the class again, shoulders back, spine straight. A corpsman in every line of her body. That's the oath. That's the burden. That's the honor. Her voice rang clear. And I'm here to teach you how to carry it, how to stand, how to serve, how to keep going when everything inside you wants to stop. She paused, then added quietly, how to turn the worst day of your life into the foundation for saving someone else's. The classroom was silent, 30 young corpsmen processing the weight of what they were taking on. Then from the doorway, Jeremiah spoke up. And we're here to make sure you don't carry it alone. The last watch filed in, each of them taking a position around the room. Duncan with Ranger at his side, Silas with his sniper's eternal vigilance, Tobias with his engineer's practical wisdom, Nathaniel wheelchair in all radiating command, Frederick solid as the structures he built, Jeremiah with 40 years of healing in his capable hands. This is the last watch, Eva told the students. They're your instructors, your mentors, and your proof that you can survive this profession and come out the other side with your soul intact. They've given you the gift of their experience. Honor it, learn from it. And when you're old like them, hey, Silas protested with a grin. When you're experienced like them, Eva corrected, pass it on. That's how the promise continues. Over the following months, the Webb Shepard Memorial Combat Medical Training Center became known throughout the Navy and Marine Corps medical community. Not just for its technical excellence, though, that was considerable, but for producing corpsmen who understood the weight of the oath they'd taken, who knew how to make hard calls and live with them, who could stand in chaos and bring order through sheer competent determination. Eva taught every class, refused promotion that would take her away from the students. This was where she belonged, she'd realized, not in some administrative position, but here in the trenches, making sure the next generation understood what it meant to serve. Duncan recovered enough to teach tactical decision-making using case studies from his force recon days. Ranger officially retired, served as a therapy dog for veterans with PTSD, and participated in training exercises that taught students how to work with military working dogs. The last watch met every Tuesday without fail, their numbers growing as other veterans heard about the group and asked to join. They ranged in age from 58 to 83, all of them carrying their own scars and stories, all of them finding purpose in passing on what they'd learned. 1 year after the battle at the VA hospital, Eva stood at Arlington National Cemetery in front of a grave marker that read, S.G. Marcus Webb, U.S. Army, Medal of Honor, 1998 to 2026. He stood for truth. The Medal of Honor had been awarded posthumously after the full scope of Webb's investigation became public. He'd known the risks, had documented everything, had made sure that even if he died, the truth would eventually come out. Eva placed a coin on the headstone, a tradition she'd learned from the Marines. Mission complete, Sergeant. The evidence you collected brought down 37 conspirators and counting. Your K-9 is safe, and your name is on a training center that will prepare thousands of corpsmen to carry on your legacy. She paused, then added quietly, thank you for trusting Ranger to find the right person. I hope I've honored that trust. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Turned to find Sullivan approaching out of uniform, for once looking almost civilian in slacks and a jacket. Thought I'd find you here, he said, just paying respects. They stood together in silence for a moment, then Sullivan spoke. I have news. The investigation is wrapping up. Final count 42 arrests, including 2 congressmen, a defense undersecretary, and 18 defense contractors. Total fraud recovered $2.3 billion. And it all started because one corpsman refused to walk away from a dog. Eva shook her head. It started because Webb had the courage to investigate, because Duncan had the courage to ask for help, because the last watch had the courage to stand. I was just there. You were exactly where you needed to be, doing exactly what you were meant to do. Sullivan looked at her seriously. The Navy wants to recognize that. They're considering you for the Navy Cross, for action above and beyond during the VA hospital engagement. No, Eva's voice was firm. I don't need another medal, sir. I need to teach. I need to make sure Webb's death and Shepard's death and all the others that their sacrifices mean something beyond citations and ceremonies. Fair enough, Sullivan smiled slightly. Though I should mention 3 of your first graduating class just deployed with Marine units. Early reports say they're exceptional. One of them already saved 2 Marines in a firefight using techniques you taught her. Eva's chest tightened with something that might have been pride. Which student? Petty Officer Sarah Shepard. Ryan's sister. She said she enlisted because of him, because of you, because she wanted to carry on what he started. The world seemed to tilt slightly. Ava had known Sarah was in the program, had watched her grow from a grieving sister into a competent corpsman. But hearing that she'd already made a difference, already saved lives. She's good, Eva managed. Really good. Better than I was at her age. She had a better teacher. Sullivan handed Eva a letter. This is from her unit commander. Thought you'd want to read it. Ava opened the letter with shaking hands. Corpsman Shepard is exactly what we needed. Cool under fire. Technically proficient. And she has this way of keeping people calm just by being there. She reminds me of her brother. And she tells everyone she trained at Webb Shepard Memorial. You're building something important, Cross. Something that will outlast all of us. Eva folded the letter carefully, placed it in her pocket next to the ones she carried from the families of the 4 Marines. That's the goal, sir. Build something that lasts. Make sure they're never forgotten. They stood together at Webb's grave for a few more minutes, then walked back to Sullivan's car. As they drove out of Arlington past row after row of white headstones, Eva thought about all the people who'd stood, who'd fought, who'd sacrificed. And she thought about the students back at the training center, learning to carry that weight, learning to stand, learning to serve. The promise continued. 3 years after the battle, the Webb Shepard Memorial Combat Medical Training Center had trained over 600 combat corpsmen. The program had expanded, adding advanced courses in tactical medicine, trauma surgery, and mental health support. The last watch had grown to include over 30 veterans, all of them teaching all of them, passing on their hard-won wisdom. Duncan at 73 still taught 3 days a week despite his doctor's protests. Ranger, now 10 years old and officially the most decorated therapy dog in V. A history split his time between helping veterans and participating in training exercises. Eva had been promoted to Chief Petty Officer, but remained at the training center, refusing every attempt to move her to a different assignment. This was her place. These were her people. On a Tuesday evening in November, the last watch gathered for their weekly meeting. But tonight was different. Tonight they had a guest. Admiral Sullivan, newly promoted to Vice Admiral and Commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, stood at the front of the room with a folder in his hands. Gentlemen, Corpsman Cross. He looked around at the assembled veterans. 3 years ago, you did something remarkable. You defended a hospital against overwhelming odds. You protected 47 veterans who couldn't protect themselves. And you exposed a conspiracy that went to the highest levels of government. He opened the folder. The President of the United States has asked me to present the following awards. For Colonel Duncan Blackwell, the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism and voluntary risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. Duncan, leaning on his cane, accepted the medal with quiet dignity. It was my honor, sir. For Master Chief Silas Merrick, Chief Petty Officer Tobias Grant, Chief Warrant Officer Nathaniel Dawson, Chief Warrant Officer Frederick Shaw, and Senior Chief Petty Officer Jeremiah Rivers. The Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action. One by one, the members of the last watch came forward, accepted their medals, and returned to their seats. No speeches, no fanfare, just quiet acknowledgement of what they'd done. Finally, Sullivan turned to Eva. And for Chief Petty Officer Evelyn Cross, the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism, leadership under fire, and completing a mission critical to national security while under direct enemy attack. Eva stood, her heart pounding. Sir, I don't... That's an order, Chief. Sullivan's voice was gentle but firm. Accept the medal, honor the people who stood with you, and keep doing what you're doing because it matters more than you know. Eva accepted the Navy Cross with hands that trembled slightly, feeling the weight of it, both literal and metaphorical. 2 of the nation's highest military decorations, for a medic who'd spent 3 years thinking she was a failure. After the ceremony, after the congratulations and the photos and the quiet celebration, Eva found herself alone in the training center's memorial room. The wall had grown over the years. Webb, Shepard, Martinez, Chen, Torres, and now photos of other students who'd graduated from the program and died in service. Not many, thank God, but enough to remind her why this mattered. Duncan found her there, Ranger at his side as always. The old Marine didn't say anything, just stood beside her looking at the wall. Do you ever stop carrying them? Eva asked quietly. No, Duncan said, but you learn to carry them differently. Learn that the weight isn't a burden. It's a reminder, a promise that what they did mattered, that who they were won't be forgotten. Is that enough? Some days it has to be because it's all we've got. Duncan's hand found Ranger's head fingers, gentle in the dog's graying fur. But then I see kids like Sarah Shepard, like all your graduates going out and saving lives because you taught them how, and I think maybe it is enough. Maybe that's how we honor the dead, by making sure their sacrifice creates something that lasts. Eva looked at the medals in her hand. The Silver Star from a year ago, the Navy Cross from tonight, heavy metals symbolizing things that couldn't be quantified or weighed. Ryan Shepard told me to keep saving people, she said. In Damascus right before he died. I thought I'd failed him because I couldn't save him. Couldn't save the others. But you saved 23 that day, and you've saved hundreds more by teaching them how to do what you do. That's not failure, Cross. That's legacy. Eva turned to look at Duncan. How did you do it after Fallujah, after losing your legs, after everything? How did you keep going? Duncan smiled, sad and knowing. I found a reason to stand. And when I couldn't stand anymore, I found a reason to sit up and keep fighting from this damn chair. And when Ranger came into my life, I found a reason to take care of something other than my own pain. He gestured around the memorial room at the training center beyond. You've given hundreds of people a reason to keep going. Students who found purpose in service. Veterans who found purpose in teaching. A whole community of people who stand together because you showed them how. We, Eva corrected, we showed them. Yeah, Duncan's smile widened. We did. They stood together in the memorial room, an old Marine and a young corpsman, a retired K-9, and the weight of promises kept looking at the faces of the honored dead and seeing not just loss but legacy. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the VA hospital in shades of gold. In the classroom, students were studying, learning, preparing to carry on the oath. In the conference room, the last watch was sharing stories, teaching lessons written in blood and sacrifice. And in the memorial room, Eva finally understood what Jeremiah had tried to tell her 3 years ago. The guilt she carried wasn't a burden. It was proof. Proof that she'd cared. Proof that their lives had mattered. Proof that she was exactly the kind of corpsman the Navy needed. Someone who remembered, someone who stood, someone who kept the promise no matter the cost. She placed the Navy Cross on the memorial shelf beside her Silver Star and turned to Duncan. Tuesday meetings, 1900 hours, the last watch. Always, Duncan confirmed. Once a Marine, always a Marine. Once a corpsman, Eva added with a small smile. Always a corpsman. Jeremiah's voice came from the doorway, the rest of the last watch filing in behind him. Now stop getting all sentimental and come have dinner with us. We're old. We can't stand around forever. The laughter that followed was warm and genuine, and as Eva walked out with her brothers in arms, Ranger trotting contentedly beside them, she felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Peace. Not complete, not perfect, but there. The kind of peace that came from knowing you'd stood when it mattered, that you'd kept the promise, that the people you'd lost would be proud of who you'd become. And as the last watch gathered around a table at the VA cafeteria sharing stories and planning next week's training, Eva silently added one more promise to the one she already carried. To never stop teaching, never stop serving, never stop standing for the ones who couldn't stand for themselves. Because that was the oath, and the oath never ended. The Webb Shepard Memorial Combat Medical Training Center has trained 847 combat corpsmen in its first 5 years. 98% of graduates rate their training as essential to their ability to save lives in combat. 0 graduates have been lost to enemy action, though 3 have died in training accidents and 1 to illness. K-9 Ranger served as a therapy dog until his death in 2029 at age 12. He is buried at Arlington National Cemetery beside Sergeant Marcus Webb. Colonel Duncan Blackwell continues to teach at age 76. He has outlived his doctor's predictions by 7 years and counting. The last watch now includes 47 veterans and meets every Tuesday at 1900 hours. New members are always welcome. 42 individuals were convicted in the Webb murder conspiracy. Total sentences, 847 years. Total fraud recovered $2.4 billion. Chief Petty Officer Evelyn Cross was promoted to Senior Chief in 2028. She refused further promotion to remain with the training center. In 2030, she was awarded the Presidential Citizens Medal for her contributions to military medicine and veteran welfare. She still teaches every class, still carries the names, still keeps the promise.